All right, so today we're going to start something new. It's called subroutines. So this is not something that you need to include on your final project. It's more of just a skill that is good to be able to have because of how it lets you approach larger codes. As you've noticed, I'm sure our programs are starting to get long. We've had programs that extend over dozens and dozens of lines of code. Some didn't have to, but I mean, we've definitely gone over the point where we can comfortably write 30 or 40 lines of code and have it work the way that we want, at least on the whole. So as you start getting into larger codes, something that can be very useful is segmenting it out so you can follow what's going on where. If you've had the experience, you going through your code and trying to say, okay, the inputs were up here. Okay, where do they get used again? And then you have to read through every single line of code to figure out where they get used. If you want to do one particular section of code twice, you end up copying and pasting like 20 lines. You stick it down there again. And I know a bunch of people did the projectile motion problems like that, which is an entirely valid way to do it. But you have like 3 or 4 blocks of the exact same code. It would make sense if there was some way to shorten that somehow and make it more straightforward. If you suddenly find a bug in one of those, now you have to fix it in all of them. It'd be nice if you could just have to fix it once, and then you knew that it was fixed and it was done, and that was it. So subroutines help with all this. They also help with integrating with other programs. I know for my master's thesis, one of the things that we were trying to do was create a code that would interface with a rotorcraft blade aerodynamic solver. We were trying to put a wing or body aerodynamic solver in parallel with that. So if you can include it as a subroutine of that larger code, it's more modular. It's something you can stick extra capabilities into without having to rewrite the other code. That's kind of the flexibility that subroutines can give you. So let's play the game. I think a decent example of this, it comes in the first project that y'all did. This was the linear regression calculator, right? So your code looked something like this. You find information, find the slope, find the y-intercept, find the t-value, find Pearson's R, plot it, mess around with the plot a little bit, and it's all in one thing, right? So to kind of reiterate what I just said, a modularized code, or one that uses subroutines, might look, if you redid it, it would look something like this. You have one module that all it does is grab information. Another module, all it does is find the slope and y-intercept. Another module, it does the statistical analysis. Another module plots the data in line and formats your graph a little bit. And all these modules share variables in some way, but they're all distinct from one another. So you can kind of look at one at a time. It makes it, as I said, it makes it a lot easier to debug. Also, if you want to swap out this slope and y-intercept thing and maybe put in some Lagrangian polynomial regression instead, great, you can do that. All you have to change is that particular subroutine. You don't have to mess with the rest of the code the way it would be in a whole long string. So it might be sharing variables and such. As a subroutine, you know exactly what you're sharing from that to the rest of this, so it's a lot easier to manipulate. So let's play with this a bit. What does this look like in Python? That is the question. So let's get out of this, pull up this. There we go. All right, so pull up my Vim. All right, so I'm here. I'm going to do something really, really easy for the first one. It's just going to be, it's almost going to be dumb how easy it is. I'm going to make a code that takes two numbers and adds them together, but it adds them in a subroutine. Okay. Again, it's like absurd how simple that is. You wouldn't really use a subroutine for this, but at least want to show you what the syntax looks like, right? So the first thing that's going to be different, and some of you guys used this before, so I hope I'm not rehashing too much, is so we're going to use a definition statement. So we're going to start out with with kind of our main section. I'm just going to knock it down a couple lines. Just going to def main, open paren, close paren. So what this does is it defines def a section of code, and the name of that code is called, in this case, main. These parentheses, if you think of like the print command, anything you put in the parentheses gets printed, right? So anything you put in the parentheses is an input to whatever the function is. In this case, the function is now main. I don't have to have any inputs. So that's the case here. There are no inputs because there's nothing in the parentheses, and that's okay. So I'm going to call it main. Going to ask the user for some values. And the input statement, what kind of a variable does will first value be once the user puts in a number there? Will it be a string, float, or an int? Those are your three options: string, float, or int. Why an int? Any other thoughts? All right. Well, let's have a go at this then. I'm going to print first value. Before I run this though, the trick is I've defined main. I've told the computer what main is. It is a function that does not require any inputs. It asks the user for a number and it prints that number. That is what main does. But I have to tell the computer to run it. So in order to do that, I do that. I type in its name, open paren, close paren, and that's it. Might as well throw some comments here. And I'm going to separate my definition statements from the rest of my code. All right, so let's run that. Hang on, that's not what I wanted. I want type that. There we go. So I printed out the type of that number, and the type of that number is string. right? That's what you always get from an input function. So what do we have to do in order to actually use that as a number? Can I do that number times 2 right now? What would I get if I multiplied that by 2 in Python? Let's give that a shot. Like that? Yeah, the number twice, because you said, hey, give me 2 of those strings, and said, yep, gotcha, here's 2 of them. So I can't leave it as a string. I have to do something to it to make it into a number. So how do I convert data types? How do I convert from a string to a float, let's say? There we go. Float, open paren, all that stuff. So input gives you the string, float makes it not a string. Great. Now I need 2 of those numbers. And if I was writing this linearly, meaning if I was not using the subroutines, I do something like this, right? Just say, and then something like that. Where I just say, here are the 2 values, add them together, I get this 3rd value, and then I just print what the summation of that is. And this will work. This will work just fine. Again, remember I said this was like a super dumb, easy example. So it's almost too simple. Like this works, it adds 2 numbers together and it spits out the output to 5 decimal places, right? So I can run that. There's 1, there's 5, there goes 6, great, that makes sense. Lovely, but let's try to do this. Let's try to see what subroutines mean for something like this. So this code has kind of 3 distinct sections to it, right? We got this bit up here where we're asking for input from the user. We have this bit here where we're doing the work of the code. We've got this bit here where we're outputting the results, right? So we've got 3 distinct sections here. So if I was going to start writing subroutines, I'd write 3 subroutines. So let's start by doing the one in the middle. Adding values. Actually, no. Let's just start at the end. That'd be easier. So we're going to start with this last one. So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to put it into a subroutine. I'm going to write my subroutine first. So go up here. I'm going to define a new function, a new subroutine. I'm going to call it the output subroutine. The user output subroutine. And this one is going to require something to go into it, right? If this is the subroutine where I put something out to the user, that subroutine needs to know what that output is. And this is kind of the trick with subroutines. The variables that we've been using up till now, we were able to use anywhere that we wanted in the code, right? However, once we start segmenting the code, we also segment variables too. I have first value on line 8, but it's inside of the main routine. User output will not know what first value is because first value is not in user output. So I need to kind of specify a couple of variables to put into this, and then I need to make sure that when I use it, I put those variables in. So let's just show an example first before we make it too complicated. I'm going to say that there's a I'm going to put my addition result into here, and I mean that subroutine is just going to do exactly what was done down there. Look like that, except my what's called addition result is the variable that I'm going to use, which will be whatever the result of the addition is. All right. So it'll look something like that. That is my subroutine. In order to use that subroutine, just like I have to say main, I have to say user output wherever I want to use user output. So I want to use it right where I used to have my results being printed, right? So, and I'm saying that the input to that subroutine should be what? If that subroutine prints the kind of results of adding the two values together, the input to that subroutine should be what? What does that subroutine need to know in order to print the sum of first value and second value? Yeah. Remember, this guy up here, anything that's outside of main sees nothing that goes on here. So in order for this guy, what's called the user output subroutine, in order for that to know what the summation of first value and second value is, it needs to be given it. So in the same way that when we use the print command, everything inside of those parentheses is the input to that command. Everything inside the parentheses to user output, because I've defined an input to it, everything inside those parentheses is an input to that subroutine. So output, the variable output, is being input to this subroutine, and whenever it's input to that subroutine, well, I've called that input addition result. Does that make sense? I know the language can be a little bit confusing here. You can also think of it as, if I go up to line 3, oops, if I go up to line 3, this addition, this variable addition result is a placeholder. It is whatever the input is to that function. Okay. Maybe we can do it. Maybe another way to look at it is like this. This is I really want to make sure that we get this because it's a kind of key part. If I pop back over to PowerPoint, so imagine, if you will, that each one of these boxes is one subroutine in our code. This one is main. And this one is user output. All right. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the parentheses for a second. All right. So main does some math it asks user for input. That's kind of the first thing that it does. Then it adds input values together, right? So and if I was doing this, if I wanted to add some pictures here, because pictures are always fun. Not those two, I just want this guy and this guy. Might say that part 1, ask user for f value, it results in those in value 1 and value 2. Those both get thrown into the second part, where we add those two values together. That second part results in the variable output, right? Okay. But this is some subroutine over here. It has no idea what the crap's going on in main, right? Anything that is inside of main stays there, and that's kind of it. So when I want to take that variable output and push it over into user output such that it knows what what number to print, I have to pass it over to it. I have to share it. And the way that, and one way that you can do that is I can set up user output to have a defined input. And I call that, what did I call that? Addition result. I call that addition result. So what I do is I take output and I put it into a user output, kind of using that defined input, such that it can print that. And when it's done with that, that's its entire section of code. So it jumps right back to where it was in main. And main is done at that point. Does this make some amount of sense? So key things to remember with subroutines is that they don't know anything that goes on outside of them. If you want it to know more, you have to give it something. And you can only give it something if you've defined an input to the subroutine. Main has no inputs to it. User output, we defined an input to it. When we had the def statement, we established an input variable, which was the one that was between the parentheses. So we established an input that has an input. We can use it to feed in information in, and then use it inside of the subroutine. All right, cool. Bless you. Let's pull back over into here. All righty. So All right, so we're here. One last thing, has to be a return statement in a subroutine. Essentially, it's short way of saying it is that it says go back to the main code. It also, if there's an output from the subroutine, it goes through return. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's. I might have forgotten a parenthesis. We'll find out in a second. There we go. Great. So our code still works the same way. It still does the same thing, at least. But now it's doing the final step through a subroutine. Okay. Yep. Correct. It returns to wherever it came from. So in this case, yeah, it came from line 17. So it returns to that same point. And there's no output from user output. If there were, I'd add it as part of that return statement. So there's no output here. As a result, you don't have to set this equal to anything or whatever, because this just runs, does its thing, and moves on. That's it. All righty. So let's move up. Let's make a subroutine for the addition on line 14 and 15. Before I do that, I'm going to just add a separator, just so it's obvious where different subroutines start and stop. And let's, oh, one other thing to mention. You might think it'd be a lot more straightforward to just call this output, right? Let's give that a shot. Well, that's not good. One, because I didn't fix all the things I should have. We'll see more in a second. So this is saying name user output is not defined. I'm sure that you guys have seen that before at some point in life. What does that mean? It's probably been a while since you've seen it, but it's a name error. It means that there's something wrong with the name, right? It's saying on line 22, so let's pop in here, go down to line 22. User output is not defined. Well, it's right. Is there anything called user output? No. So it's saying I don't know what to do. That should be output, right? So let's give that a shot. Now it's a good time. Saying float object is not callable. What the heck does that mean? So if I look at my code on line 22, my function is called output, right? And then I have this thing I'm putting into it that's also called output. So what does output mean? Well, if I look over here, if I read my code, I defined output as this subroutine back up on line 6, right? So that came first. That should be like the first thing that the code figured out, right? It didn't do anything with it because I haven't called it yet. But it said, okay, it's defined. Great, done. Comes down and say, okay, here's main, it's defined as that block. Okay, great. Then it came down here and it was told to run main. Okay. Said, okay, I'll come up, I'll run main. Okay, I'll grab a value, grab another value. Hey, output's equal to 6 or whatever. Now you're trying to put 6 into something you just made 6, right? So this is kind of, it's called, sometimes I think at least one person redefined what the print command was. You can use subroutine names as variable names, but it overwrites whatever the subroutine is. So don't do that. Make sure that you always use different names for your subroutines as opposed to your variables. All right. Cool. All right. So let's go back to where we were. We were making a subroutine for this second guy on line 19 and 20. So going to call this the addition subroutine. I'm just going to copy that code out now. I'm going to say define addition. That's the name of my subroutine. How many inputs should I have for this subroutine? How many things am I adding? 2. So I need to pass 2 variables into the subroutine. So there are my two variables. I'm going to separate them by a comma. And that's how Python knows that there's one variable and then a second variable coming in. I'm going to call them value 1 and value 2, and that's how I'm going to use them inside of the subroutine. So I'm going to paste my code from before. Do I have to change anything with this? Does first value exist inside of this subroutine? No, I see a couple of head shaking. And you're right. First value and second value do not exist inside of this subroutine. Therefore, I can't use them. So what should I write here instead? Yep. Value 1, value 2. Does it matter? How do I say this? Does it matter what variable I use for the summation there as opposed to whatever variable I use down in main? No, it doesn't, because these two don't talk to each other, right? They only pass what information I want them to pass. So this is another reason why subroutines are kind of nice. I can use whatever the heck variables I want up here and whatever the heck variables I want down here. And if I repeat one here and here that I use is down in line 9 through 12, it doesn't matter because the two don't talk to each other. So that can be a really nice kind of thing. Great. All right, so I got my two values. They're added together. I need to return to the main code, but I'm going to return a value to the main code. I'm going to return whatever the summation of those is. So I'm just going to put that in parentheses next to return. Okay. So I'm going to split my screen up here so I can keep a few things going. So I took my code, I took this code out of line 23 or so. So that's where I'm going to call my subroutine. Calling a subroutine is that's called running. That's the same thing as running a subroutine or using a function. It's the same sort of an idea. So I'm going to call addition. And what should my inputs to this be? What am I trying to add? You got it. So first value, that'll be my first input. Second value, that'll be my second input. And it follows the same order in the same format that I defined the function with back up on line 3, right? It was value 1 comma value 2. So when I call the function, do first value comma second value. And it'll come in the same order. So first value, it's going to come in as value 1. Second value, it's going to come in as value 2. Cool? Cool. All right, so I'm just going to put a comment on that. Now, the trick here is that addition, it does return something to the main code, right? It returns output. At least that's what we told it to return back up on line 6. So output is a number, right? It's a float. So I need to save that float somewhere. When it returns to line 24, it's going to return a float and say, hey, here's the number. Tell me what to do with this. If I don't do anything with it, it won't know that it exists. So I'm going to set all that equal to something. Actually, I'm going to call it sum, just because. No, I'm not going to do that. I'll call it final value, which is also what I'm going to send off to the user output. I could use the same variable name that I returned. I could use output back down here. I just wanted to use something different just to show that it is being returned. All right. And that it didn't depend on your variable name. All right. So that's that. So let's run that and see if it still works. Cool. Still what we want, right? It's doing the exact same result. We've just moved stuff into subroutines. All right. So that's our computational subroutine. The only subroutine that we have left is the user input part, right? So let's make ourselves another subroutine. Should there be any input to this one? Does main have to give anything to this? No. So don't have to worry about putting anything in there. So what has to go on in here? Well, I can just run down steal a couple lines of code, paste them in here. I'm just going to shorten this up a little bit. Now what values do I need to give back to the main code, if any? If I look down at my main, this was on line 28. And then I took the two values that I got in, which I used to call first value and second value, and I put them into addition. So that means I need to pass whatever's in user input back to the main code, right? Because user input's gathering the input from the user that used to be in the main code, but it's now not. Now it's in the subroutine, user input. And main doesn't know anything that goes on inside of user input, right? It doesn't see it, doesn't know it, unless I actively tell it. So it means I have to return val1 and val2, because those are the two user inputs. So back over in the main code, when I call user input, it now has two values coming back instead of one. Well, the same way that I returned two values, which is just val1 comma val2 in the return statement, that's the same way that I input two values, right? So it makes sense that I could also, there you go, define two values in the same way, one comma the other. And it'll just do it all in the same order as I gave it to them. Cool beans? We're all on the same page there? Does that make some amount of sense? Is there anything that doesn't make sense? Okay, let's run that and see what happens. Number 1 is 5.5, 4.5. Okay, cool. So this should have been that first subroutine. Does math and outputs it through the second and third subroutines, and hey, the value's dead on. We've taken that small code. We probably made it a lot larger than it needs to be, but let's have a look here. Let's look at the main part of the code. Look at how friggin' stupid and simple it looks now. Like it's really easy to say what's happening where. You have input, it does addition here, it outputs, done. I know exactly where each big chunk of stuff is occurring. If I want to look at any one of those, I can just grab it, look at that subroutine, and I see exactly what goes on in that particular chunk of code. It's a heck of a lot easier to look at now. Also, I don't have to worry about variables being duplicated between the first routine, the second routine, and the third routine. Heck, I can even I'll do that. So I have the same variable names now, right? In two different subroutines. It doesn't care because they're in different subroutines. One doesn't see anything outside of itself. It only sees what you tell it it's going to see. It only sees what you pass into it. It only gives away what you return out of it. So these are subroutines. Let's just go over quick how Python reads this code. I alluded to it once before, but I just want to say it one more time. So I have these grouped in order, right? Let's do something weird. I'm going to take this third one. I'm going to put it first. So if Python read and executed this code first, we should see an error, right? Well, it didn't throw an error, so it must not. So as a result, we can say that whenever we see a define statement, the code's just saying, oh, you're defining something. I'm not going to run this right now. I'm just going to keep in mind that what's called user output has one input. It has this code, and then it goes back to wherever it was called from. I'm going to remember that. I'm not going to run it right now. I'm just going to remember that you have a function, you have a subroutine with this name, this input to it, and some code that's associated with it. Does that make sense? So Python, when you run the code, it reads this first definition statement, reads the second one, reads the third one. Heck, it even reads main. And it says, okay, I have 4 separate subroutines. I'm going to remember what all those names are. And then after all that, I call main. And that's what starts of everything. Main's the only thing not inside of a subroutine, right? Like that keyword there is not inside of a subroutine. So when the Python finally gets to reading all my define statements, gets down and says, oh, main, you want me to run the subroutine called main. Hey, I know what main is. I just read it. So it'll say, okay, let me bring it up to main here on line 28. Okay, there's a comment, okay. Line 30, okay, it's saying run user input. Oh, hey, I know what user input is. I have that up on line 12. So it comes up here. It says, okay, no inputs to this. Okay, ask the user for one value, save that to val1. Ask user for a second value, save it to val2. Return val1 and val2 to wherever you came from, which is down here. on line 30. Val1 was the first, Val2 was the second. Bam. Code does that. Comes down and says, oh, hey, you want me to run addition? Hey, I know that. I just read it. You want me to put first, and you want me to give addition first value and second value, which I just got on line 30. Great, I can do that. So it says, okay, I'll come up to a addition. Well, I was just told put first value from main in as val1. Second value from main is in as val2. Okay, great. I'll add those two together. Save the sum as output, and I'll return output to wherever I started, which is on line 33. I'll save that as final value. Once I got that, okay, great. Next line. Oh, it says go to user output and give it final value. Okay, great. I've seen that one before. Okay, well, if I go up to user output, I put final value in for the give the value of the variable final value in as addition result. It puts that into a print statement and it returns to wherever it came from. So on line 36, is there any more indented code following line 36? Okay, that's it. Main is done. It is finished. So after main is done, well, there's nothing after main in my code, right? The whole code's done. That's how Python reads this stuff. It's a little bit more convoluted, but when we get more when we get more convoluted codes, it can help demystify them, make them a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to modify and create, and a heck of a lot easier to debug. Any questions on them? Great. All right. So as you might have guessed, one way that I write subroutines that I found works pretty well is if I start writing a section of code, and I realize it all does the same, is all kind of conceptually doing the same thing. Like here, we had a section of code that was doing inputs, section of code that was working on the values, section of code that was doing outputs. So I can kind of split them up like that. I'll make one subroutine for each. Then he'd say, well, I'm working on this code. This is a really big chunk that I'm going to want to do several times. So this is a big chunk that kind of has a distinct thing that it does. I'll just write that. I'll write that whole chunk out. Then I'll just copy and paste it into its own subroutine. So I won't necessarily plan ahead. Okay, I want a subroutine for this, that, and the other thing. I'll kind of just look as I go. And when I get a big chunk that kind of does its own thing, I'll make that into its own subroutine. All right. You can do subroutines in different files. We're not going to worry about that for right now. We're just going to do them inside of the code. When you do them in separate files, it can get a little twisty. So that's all I got for today then. If there are no questions. Thanks for stopping by.